You've probably met someone who reacts with visible discomfort, even hostility, at the mere mention of God. Perhaps they roll their eyes when someone talks about faith, or they launch into a tirade about how belief is nothing more than superstition. But it's not just casual skepticism. It's deeper than that. There's something visceral about their reaction, something that seems to burn within them whenever the topic of faith or righteousness comes up. They don't just reject the idea of God, they despise it. This isn't just intellectual disagreement. It's not simply a case of someone who doesn't believe in God. Many non-believers live moral lives, are open to discussion, and approach matters of faith with a degree of respect. But then there are those whose rejection is absolute, whose hatred for God is deep-seated and all-consuming. And that reaction, so intense, so unwavering, should make you wonder why. There is something profoundly unnatural about loathing the very concept of God. If someone genuinely didn't believe, why would they care so much? Why would they spend so much time attacking, ridiculing, and undermining something they claim is imaginary? Their reaction often surpasses the level of rational critique. It becomes emotional, even obsessive. They are compelled to tear down, to mock, to vilify. They can't leave it alone. That should tell you something. Human beings are wired for meaning. We are creatures who seek purpose, structure, and moral order. We cannot function in chaos for long. So we create systems, ethical, legal, and spiritual, to help us navigate existence. But for someone who rejects the idea of divine truth, what remains? The alternative is moral relativism. The belief that right and wrong are subjective, that meaning is something we construct rather than something we discover. And if you believe that morality is a mere social construct, then you are free to redefine it however you see fit. You are free to place yourself at the center of the moral universe. But there's a problem with that. You are not God. You are limited. You are fallible. And deep down, on some level, you know it. The person who hates the name of God does so because acknowledging Him would mean acknowledging their own limitations. It would mean admitting that they are not the highest authority in their own lives. It would mean confronting the reality that there is something greater than themselves, something that holds them accountable, something that demands humility rather than arrogance. And that is unbearable for some people. Hatred for the name of God often comes from a place of rebellion. It's not just about disbelief, it's about defiance. It's about rejecting authority, rejecting the notion that there are rules outside of one's own preferences and desires. It's about the refusal to submit to anything beyond the self. And where does that attitude come from? It comes from pride. It comes from the belief that I alone decide what is right and wrong. And that belief is profoundly dangerous. Because once you place yourself at the top of the moral hierarchy, once you declare that your own reasoning is the ultimate authority, you have made yourself into a god. And history has shown us what happens when human beings attempt to play that role. When someone despises the idea of God, they are often rejecting the concept of moral responsibility. If there is no God, then there is no divine justice. If there is no divine justice, then nothing we do ultimately matters. And if nothing matters, then why not do whatever benefits you in the short term? Why not manipulate? Why not exploit? Why not deceive? After all, if there is no higher authority, then morality is simply a tool, a means to an end. And that end is usually self-interest. But here's the thing, even the person who rages against God cannot fully escape the moral structure that has been embedded in the world. They still operate within it, even as they claim to reject it. They demand justice. They demand fairness. They appeal to concepts like human rights, dignity, and compassion. But where do those concepts come from? They are not the natural products of a godless universe. They arise from the very moral order that they claim to reject. They live in contradiction, denying the foundation while standing upon it. The hatred for God is not just about rejecting belief. It is about rejecting responsibility. It is about rejecting accountability. It is about wanting the benefits of morality without the obligations that come with it. And that is why it manifests in such an intense, emotional way. Because deep down, on some level, they know. They know that if God is real, then they are not in control. They know that if God is real, then their actions have consequences beyond what they can see. They know that if God is real, then they are not the ultimate judge of right and wrong. And that knowledge is unbearable for those who refuse to bow to anything beyond themselves. But here's the truth. Reality does not change simply because someone refuses to accept it. God is not diminished by the hatred of those who deny him. Truth is not altered by those who mock it. The world continues to turn, justice continues to operate, and moral order remains intact, whether or not one chooses to acknowledge it. And what happens to those who persist in their hatred? They do not find peace. They do not find joy. They may believe they are free, but in reality they are enslaved to their own bitterness, their own pride, their own refusal to see. They build their identity around opposition, around defiance, around tearing down rather than building up, and that kind of existence is empty. It is corrosive. It is self-destructive. The question then is not just about recognizing when someone despises the name of God. The question is, what do you do about it? Do you confront them? Do you argue? Do you try to persuade them? Sometimes, yes. But more often than not, the best thing you can do is stand firm in what you know to be true. Live in a way that demonstrates that belief in God is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. Live in a way that shows that faith produces meaning, not delusion. Live in a way that makes it clear that morality is not an arbitrary set of rules, but a foundation for a life well lived. Because in the end, hatred for God does not change reality. It only changes the person who harbors it. And that change is rarely for the better. Deception is a corrosive force. It operates subtly at first, worming its way into thoughts, words, and actions. But over time it grows, twisting reality, eroding trust, and distorting perceptions until the person trapped in it no longer sees the world as it truly is. Someone who thrives on deception is not just lying in the conventional sense. They are participating in something deeper, something darker. They are manipulating truth itself, shaping it to their advantage. And in doing so, they become aligned with forces that are fundamentally opposed to order, structure, and meaning. Lies are not just words, they are weapons. They can be used to control, to distort, to destroy. A person who operates in deception does so with intent. They know on some level that what they say is untrue, but they continue because deception serves their purpose. They use it to gain power, to shift blame, to avoid responsibility, or to elevate themselves at the expense of others. When confronted with the truth, they do not yield. Instead, they double down, twisting reality even further to justify their actions. This is not a small thing. It is not just a personality flaw. It is a fundamental rejection of truth itself. And in rejecting truth, they embrace something far more dangerous, the deliberate manipulation of reality to serve their own desires. And there is nothing more corrosive to the fabric of society, to the foundation of morality, than that. You see this pattern play out time and time again. It starts small. Perhaps a minor distortion, a convenient misrepresentation. But over time, as deception becomes a habit, it escalates. The person who once manipulated truth to avoid discomfort begins to manipulate it for power. They begin to see lies not as an unfortunate necessity, but as a tool, one they can wield to shape the world around them according to their will. And the deeper they go, the less they care about the consequences of their falsehoods. They become intoxicated by the ability to deceive, by the control it gives them over those who trust them. But deception is never free. There is always a cost. A person who lives by deception does not merely deceive others, they deceive themselves. The more they manipulate reality, the less they understand it. They construct a world built on falsehoods and they convince themselves that it is real, but reality is unyielding. Truth remains truth, no matter how many lies are layered on top of it. And when the false world they have built inevitably begins to collapse, they find themselves lost, unable to distinguish between the illusions they created and the reality they ignored. More than that, deception isolates. It makes genuine relationships impossible. How can you trust someone who lies as easily as they breathe? How can you form deep connections with someone who views honesty as a weakness? Those who build their lives on lies push away those who seek truth. They surround themselves only with those who are willing to play along, to accept their version of reality without question. And in doing so, they cut themselves off from real, meaningful human connection. At its core, deception is a rejection of moral responsibility. To lie is to refuse to face the truth. to refuse to accept consequences, to refuse to be held accountable. It is an escape, a way of avoiding the hard realities of life by fabricating an easier, more convenient version of the world. But reality does not go away just because someone refuses to acknowledge it. The consequences still come, the truth still asserts itself. And when that moment arrives, the person who has lived by deception finds themselves without a foundation, without stability, without anything real to hold on to. But there is something even more sinister about those who thrive on deception. They do not simply lie to protect themselves or to avoid discomfort. They use deception as a weapon. They create narratives designed to manipulate, to turn people against each other, to foster division and chaos. They do not care about the damage they cause because to them the truth is irrelevant. What matters is control. What matters is power. And if bending reality to their will allows them to maintain that power, they will do it without hesitation. You can recognize these people by their patterns. They refuse to answer questions directly. They shift blame. They change their story depending on who is listening. They never admit fault, never acknowledge wrongdoing, never accept responsibility. They create confusion because confusion is their ally. The less people understand what is true, the easier it is to control them. And that is the ultimate goal, to shape the perception of reality itself, to make people doubt their own understanding, their own judgment, their own moral compass. But here's the problem. Reality is not something that can be rewritten indefinitely. It is not something that bends forever to human will. There is a point at which the deception collapses under its own weight. And when that happens, the consequences are severe. The person who lives by deception will eventually find themselves consumed by it. They will reach a point where they no longer know what is true and what is not. They will become trapped in the very illusions they created. And at that point, they will have no escape. They will have severed every real connection, alienated every honest person, and built their life on a foundation that was never real to begin with. The alternative is simple, though not easy. It is to tell the truth, not just when it is convenient, not just when it serves a purpose, but always. Truth is the only thing that provides stability, the only thing that allows for real relationships, real accountability, real meaning. Those who reject truth in favor of deception are not merely making a bad choice, they are aligning themselves with something profoundly destructive. And that destruction does not remain isolated. It spreads. It infects everything it touches. Because when deception becomes the standard, when truth is seen as optional, everything falls apart. The only way to combat deception is with truth. The only way to resist those who thrive on lies is to refuse to participate in their falsehoods. Speak the truth, live by the truth, align yourself with reality no matter how difficult it may be. Because in the end, deception destroys, but truth endures. There is a particular kind of person whose presence brings with it an overwhelming sense of unease. You've met them before. They don't just express anger, they radiate it. Their words are laced with contempt, their actions motivated by resentment, and their entire demeanor is defined by an undercurrent of hostility. They are driven not by a desire for justice, not by a legitimate grievance, but by a seething, relentless hatred, one that consumes everything in its path. And if you look closely, you'll notice that their rage is not directed at any one person or institution. It is directed at existence itself. Hatred of life is a dangerous thing. It is not just cynicism, nor is it merely a symptom of personal dissatisfaction. It is something deeper, something darker. It is a complete rejection of the fundamental structures of being. It is an attack on meaning itself. And those who embrace this kind of hatred do not stop at words. They seek to tear down, to destroy, to corrupt. They cannot stand to see anything good, anything functional, anything that flourishes. Because it is a reminder that their worldview is flawed, that their resentment is unjustified. And so they set out to ruin, to dismantle, to make the world reflect the chaos that resides within them. You can see it in the way they treat others. They do not build, they tear down. They do not offer solutions, they seek destruction. When confronted with beauty, they scoff. When presented with truth, they mock. They take pleasure in the suffering of others because it validates their belief
that life itself is suffering, that nothing truly matters, that all hope is a lie. And in doing so, they spread their hatred like a disease, infecting those around them with the same nihilism that drives them. But this kind of hatred does not emerge from nowhere. It is often born of pain, real, genuine pain. Perhaps they were wronged. Perhaps they suffered injustices. Perhaps they were betrayed or abandoned or broken in ways that most people cannot comprehend. And rather than confront that suffering, rather than seek to overcome it, they let it fester. They allowed it to consume them. And in time, they began to see the world not as a place of potential, not as a place where redemption is possible, but as a place of pure malevolence, a place where suffering is the only truth. And once you have accepted that worldview, once you have decided that existence itself is corrupt, that nothing is worth saving, that all goodness is an illusion, then you are capable of anything. If life is fundamentally evil, then destruction is not only justified, it is necessary. If meaning is a lie, then morality is nothing more than a tool, a means to an end. And if suffering is inevitable, then why not make others suffer too? Why not drag them down into the same pit of despair? Why not punish existence itself for the pain you have endured? This is where hatred of life becomes truly dangerous, because it does not stay contained. It seeks expression. It seeks action. It drives people to sabotage their own happiness, to undermine the success of others, to lash out at anything that reminds them that the world is not as hopeless as they believe. It leads to cruelty, to violence, to destruction for its own sake. And the most terrifying thing about it is that those who embrace this hatred believe themselves to be justified. They believe they are acting in accordance with the truth, that the world really is as horrible as they perceive it to be. But here's the problem. That perception is a lie. The world is not perfect, but it is not irredeemable. Suffering exists, but so does beauty. Injustice is real, but so is justice. Hatred may thrive in some hearts, but love exists in others. And to deny that, to pretend that life is nothing more than an endless abyss of pain and corruption, is to reject reality itself. Those who hate life seek to spread that hatred. They want others to share in their misery, to validate their perception of the world. But they do not have to succeed. The antidote to their nihilism is not more destruction, not more anger, not more despair. It is meaning, it is truth. It is the relentless pursuit of goodness, even in the face of suffering. And here's the challenge. You will encounter these people. You will feel their hatred, their bitterness, their desire to destroy, and you will have to decide. Will you let them pull you down with them? Will you allow their despair to take root in your own soul? Or will you stand firm? Will you refuse to be corrupted by their nihilism? Will you insist that life, despite its suffering, is still worth living? Because that is the ultimate test. The forces that seek destruction will always exist, but so will the forces that seek to build. The question is not whether the world contains both. The question is, which one will you serve? Some people are consumed by an unrelenting desire for power. Not the kind of power that brings responsibility, order, or meaning, but a pathological drive for dominance, control, and submission. This is not the pursuit of greatness or the disciplined cultivation of strength. It is something far more insidious. It is the thirst to see others weakened, diminished, and crushed underfoot. It is the desire to rule for the sake of ruling, to control, not because one is capable and virtuous, but because control itself is the objective. This kind of hunger for power is not merely a human failing. It is an outright rejection of the fundamental structures that make life meaningful. It is the willingness to bend reality, to rewrite truth, to manipulate and distort in service of nothing but personal gain. It is a mindset that sees morality as an obstacle and integrity as a weakness. And those who are gripped by this kind of ambition, who view others not as individuals with intrinsic worth, but as pawns to be used, are dangerous in the deepest possible sense. You can recognize these people by how they behave in the world. They do not seek cooperation. They do not engage in honest dialogue. They are not interested in mutual benefit. Instead, they strategize, they scheme, they maneuver. Every interaction is a calculated move. in a never-ending game of personal advantage. If they are kind, it is not because they possess kindness, but because they believe kindness will buy them something. If they listen, it is not because they value understanding, but because they seek information to use against others. Every word, every gesture, every action is driven by a singular objective: power. But true power, the kind that builds civilizations, sustains families, and creates meaning, does not operate this way. Real power is responsibility. It is the capacity to bear burdens, to lift others up, to guide, protect, and nurture. It requires sacrifice. It demands discipline. It insists on truth. And it is precisely these things that those obsessed with domination reject. They want authority without responsibility, control without wisdom, superiority without merit. This kind of person does not strive to build anything worthwhile. They're not creators, not builders, not leaders in the truest sense. They do not add value to the world. Instead, they thrive on destruction. If they see something strong, they seek to weaken it. If they encounter something pure, they seek to corrupt it. If they meet someone good, they seek to break them. And they do this because they recognize deep down that they are not strong in any genuine way. Their power is not real power. It is theft. It is deceit. It is the illusion of control sustained only by fear and manipulation. And when such people are confronted by something truly formidable, by someone who will not yield to their games, who refuses to be intimidated, who stands firmly in truth and responsibility, they react with rage. They lash out. They attempt to destroy what they cannot control because to them, the very existence of something beyond their grasp is an insult. They cannot bear the idea that they are not the ultimate arbiters of reality. They cannot accept that true strength comes not from dominance, but from discipline, not from coercion, but from wisdom. There is something deeply malevolent about this kind of ambition, something that goes beyond mere selfishness. It is parasitic. It does not create, it consumes. It does not strengthen, it weakens. It does not bring order, it spreads chaos. And it does all of this while masquerading as competence, while pretending to be leadership, while disguising itself as something noble and necessary. But it is none of those things. It is destruction for its own sake, a perversion of what power is meant to be. And it is dangerous because it is infectious. It spreads through fear, through deception, through the slow erosion of principles and standards. It tempts those who are weak, offering them the illusion of strength. It convinces them that morality is a burden, that truth is inconvenient, that integrity is an obstacle to success. And once a person accepts that, once they begin to believe that power justifies anything, that control is the highest good, then there is no limit to what they will justify in its pursuit. But here is the truth. Real power is not about dominance. It is about responsibility. It is about the willingness to carry the heaviest burden, to endure suffering without resentment, to face chaos and bring order. It is about lifting others up, not grinding them down. Those who seek power only for themselves, who desire control at any cost, are not leaders. They are tyrants. They are destroyers, and they are not to be trusted. And so the choice remains. Do you seek power for the sake of control, or do you pursue strength in the service of something greater? Do you manipulate, deceive, and dominate? Or do you take on responsibility, tell the truth, and build something meaningful? The former is easy. It requires nothing but cunning and cruelty. The latter is difficult. It demands effort, sacrifice, and discipline. But only one of these paths leads to something worthwhile. The other leads only to destruction of others and eventually of yourself. There are those who possess a deep and abiding contempt for the sacred. They mock what is holy, they degrade what is meaningful, and they treat that which others hold dear with nothing but scorn. This is not the skepticism of an honest mind questioning the world, nor is it the doubt of a person struggling to understand. No, this is something much darker. It is not mere disbelief, it is active desecration. It is the impulse to corrupt, to pervert, to take what is highest and drag it into the dirt. It is destruction in its most cynical form. You can see this impulse at work in the way they speak, in the way they behave. They do not simply reject goodness, they sneer at it. They do not merely turn away from truth, they mock those who seek it. They find joy in the act of destruction itself. To them, nothing is beyond ridicule, nothing is beyond defilement, and they seek not just to reject the sacred, but to make others reject it as well. Why? Because the existence of something sacred, something that is beyond manipulation, beyond self-interest, beyond cynical exploitation, stands as a direct challenge to their worldview. It reminds them that there is something higher, something more meaningful than their own desires and impulses. And rather than grapple with that, rather than confront what it might mean, they choose instead to tear it down. Because if nothing is sacred, if nothing is meaningful, if nothing is untouchable, then they are free to do whatever they please. But here's the problem. When you destroy the sacred, you destroy the foundation of meaning itself. You do not merely strip away illusions, you strip away the very structures that make life bearable. The sacred is what we orient ourselves around. It is what gives us direction, what gives us purpose. It is what keeps us from falling into chaos, from being consumed by despair. And when it is gone, when all that is left is a barren wasteland of cynicism and mockery, what remains to guide us? Nothing. People who take pleasure in corrupting the sacred are not just attacking ideas. They are attacking the psychological stability of those around them. They are cutting the cords that hold individuals, families, and societies together. And they do this knowingly, they do it gleefully, because in a world without meaning, in a world where nothing is holy, there is no morality, no accountability, only power, only control, only the raw pursuit of self-interest. And that is the world they want, a world where they are free to do as they please without guilt, without limits, without consequence. But this is not freedom. It is not enlightenment. It is destruction, plain and simple. Because the truth is that human beings cannot function without the sacred. We need it. We crave it. We are lost without it. Strip it away and you are left with nothing but nihilism, despair, and endless suffering. And those who embrace that path, who devote themselves to tearing down what is meaningful, soon find that they are left with nothing of value in their own lives. They may laugh as they mock, they may feel powerful as they destroy, but in the end they are hollow. They have nothing. And they have made certain that no one else has anything either. This is why the rejection of the sacred is so dangerous. It does not remain contained within the individual. It spreads, it infects, it poisons everything it touches. It encourages others to abandon their sense of purpose, to cast aside their moral compass, to treat everything as a joke. And once that process begins, it is nearly impossible to reverse. And so the choice is clear. Do you defend what is sacred? Do you recognize its value, its necessity, its centrality to life itself? Or do you stand by as it is torn down, as it is ridiculed, as it is destroyed? Because make no mistake, if the sacred falls, everything else falls with it. Meaning morality, truth, these things do not survive in a world that has lost all reverence. They collapse, and in their place comes only suffering, only chaos, only despair. To protect the sacred is to protect the very foundation of life itself. And if you do not, if you allow it to be mocked, to be degraded, to be corrupted, then do not be surprised when there is nothing left worth defending.